Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's event. We're going to get started. I'm so happy to have you here with us today. I'm just checking out the chat, see who's here. I have Kate with us, and I also have VG. Thank you so much for joining for the live session. It's great to have you. Give a little wave in the chat. I'm looking at it right here down at the bottom, so it'd be lovely to see how all you guys are doing today, how y'all are doing. So let me know in the chat. Okay, so I'm really excited about today's talk. So today we're going to talk all about how to move marketing, the marketing comms industry from a provider of pollution to a future of solutions. So we're going to be talking about that transition, also where marketing and comms currently is in existence in those areas, and then how we can start making that journey forward. So before we get started, just so that you know a little bit of housekeeping, these recordings will always be hosted in our Substack community. After the live stream, what happens is it gets placed as an article. So I create an article after I do a little bit of summary. Then you can watch this entire replay forever. You can share it with your friends. Please do share it on social media. And so you can do all of that by just sharing the link straight from the Substack community. So give me a couple days, but that definitely will be coming up, and that'll be shareable for you. Okay. So to kick us off, let's get started. Okay. So this is me. This is 21-year-old Megan, and I am fresh out of university in this picture. I had just completed my marketing and comms degree, and I got it started working in this industry because I was excited about how fun and creative and collaborative it was. And I had heard all these great stories, and I had had internships, and this is what I thought marketing and comms is. And in a lot of ways it is. Can anybody relate to this? Just let me know. This is the original reasons that I got into this industry. But as much as this sounds really exciting and kind of like rosy colored, little did I know that there was another side of our industry that I didn't quite come to terms with. And what is this? Our industry, how is it now? After 10 years of being a marketer, this is what I started to get a peek into. I started to see what the social and environmental destruction that was happening for the marketing and comms industry. And as I was starting to peel these little bits and pieces together or apart and pull them apart, I didn't really like what I was seeing. I didn't like what I was seeing as I was starting to peel back that curtain. So for today, I want to talk about how marketing and comms has been responsible for communicating green narratives and developing creative that ultimately has fueled disinformation, misinformation, and pollution. So let's start with disinformation. And we're actually going to start with a definition of it so that we clearly understand what disinformation is. So disinformation is deliberately false and fabricated information. So people who are sending out disinformation in the world know that it's incorrect information, and they usually have an agenda behind why they're doing that. Now, misinformation is a little bit different. Misinformation is basically greenwashing. So misinformation refers to false information that is put out into the world, but it wasn't necessarily intended to cause harm, but it's still hindering climate progress. That's the big objective there. And pollution. What is pollution? Because there's a lot of it going on at the moment. Pollution, and just in a nutshell, by definition, is particles of harmful materials that are sent out to the environment and a lot of ways are causing a lot of the problems that we're seeing today in the environmental and the social crisis. So keep these three definitions in mind as we go along in this presentation, because really what I want to be talking about today is how all three of these and how marketing and comms have been fueling these three different pieces for over 50 years and how we have been a part of that. So let's start with disinformation, kind of like the worst one out of the entire bucket, in my opinion. So, how has marketing and comms been contributing to disinformation for over 50 years? So, this is the reality. I like to pick on the fossil fuel industry because they really have been teaming up against us for over 50 years. And they've been using people like you and me, creatives and marketers, in global advertising industries to help push their disinformation agendas. So, specifically, they've used creative to delay progress and spread disinformation for over 50 years, like I already said. And how have they been doing that? So, for example, they've been working with agencies like the oil and gas industry has been working with agencies, global, huge agencies, to strategically use creative and create narratives that have repositioned climate change as a theory and not as a fact, which is exactly what you see here as an example. So this is an example from 1991. That's how long this has been going on. And this is a memo that was put together by the Informed Citizens of the Environment. And you're probably like, who are these people? Well, they're not actually informed citizens of the environment. They were actually a front group of coal and utility companies that came together to create these editorials for the sole reason to achieve this idea of weaponizing science against itself, quote unquote. And in the copy of this piece of marketing collateral, the copy explains that climate change has weak evidence, that it's non existent proof, and it's inaccurate climate models, and basically that the science around climate change is open to debate, which, of course, a lot of the people who are sitting here we know is not true. Climate change is not open to debate. So kind of the key piece here is instead of fossil fuel industries stepping up 50 years ago and saying, hey, we have all this evidence, we've done the research, we know what's happening, let's communicate honestly and ethically about it. They basically have not been taking action and they've stayed silent and they've used disinformation to keep us from understanding the narrative, to take action against what we see in our world happening today. And I think a good piece to leave this is fossil fuels created this brief, but we have to remember that behind this piece that was put forth, there was a marketer creative who created the graphic or wrote the text or put the campaign together. So you can start to see how even though the fossil fuel industry is proving and pushing the agenda, marketers and creatives, we do have a part to play in it. Let's move to another example. So another example from the creative industry, how we have teamed up with the fossil fuel industry again. Yes, I'm picking on them, but they give such great examples for decades to use disinformation to exploit the uncertainty. So this is another example from ExxonMobil. And in this example, they use comprehensive climate denial campaigns starting as early as the 1980s, and it continued as late as the 2000s. And in these climate advertorials, which are usually long form educational content pieces that are positioned as not opinion pieces, but informative pieces that people can trust, they use this type of writing to they use these type of writings and they present it into publications like the New York Times and other very prominent publications. And these set of advertorials were basically recognized and are said to have been some of the longest and regular weekly use of media, of content to influence the public and the elite's opinion in contemporary America. So this is another example of how creatives and marketers were used by a company like ExxonMobil, who continues to fund climate denial campaigns like this till today, or at least ones specifically like this to at least 2018, which is not that long ago. So moving forward, another example of disinformation, because we're looking at disinformation, and this is a more recent one that you might be more familiar with. So in this regard, companies like fossil fuel companies have been telling us that it's not their fault, that it's our fault. So they've been shifting the blame onto the citizen, the person. And how have they been doing that? Through creating copy creative campaigns for at least 20 years. And this is the example, I think, of one of the biggest shifts of how they have used creative copy and messaging to make that shift towards citizens. And this was a campaign. We know what the personal carbon footprint. What you might not know is the personal carbon footprint was actually put forth by BP in between 2004 and 2006. And they spent over $100 million on this campaign to introduce the idea of the carbon footprint and to basically make it into the common buzzword that it is today. Now, this campaign, when it was first introduced, was targeting routine human activities. It was targeting lifestyle choices in individuals and like the average American household. And the whole intention of that, like I just said, was to shift the blame of carbon intensive activities from the fossil fuel companies and what they were doing to you and me. Now, this is a direct example of fossil fuel disinformation. And it's really hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that, some CEO executive of fossil fuel industry basically decided that this was their agenda and they wanted to do. And then they went over to a marketer and creative to say, hey, we want to do this. Let's make a clever and creative campaign out of it. And they were all game. And that's how we got this campaign. And that's like the developing story there. And this is really the point of this presentation, is for us to be asking, do we still want to be part of that? Now, I've been picking on fossil fuel companies a lot. I mean, they give a lot of really great examples. But we have to know that disinformation is happening a lot right now, especially on the political landscape. And it's really, all in all, disinformation is being used and has been used for a long time to replay and downplay progress, climate progress, and it's all about slowing down that process. And disinformation is not only by them, it's also been done by politicians and corporations who are spreading disinformation to basically distract and keep our attention away from the goal, which is to decarbonize and move in that direction. And we're continuing to experience this today. So I think there will always be malicious activity in the world. I want to make this point because, I'm painting it out that there's bad people in the world and everything. I think there will always be people who have their own personal interest in mind. But really kind of what I want to paint the narrative for today is, for us as marketers and communicators, we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be contributors to that narrative? Are we going to separate ourselves from the people who are intentionally being malicious and using disinformation to keep climate progress from happening? Do we want to be a part of that? So now let's look at misinformation. So misinformation you might be a little bit more familiar with. So again, in a nutshell, that's greenwashing. So let's look at the fossil fuel industry again. Great examples, as always. So greenwashing, misinformation. So fossil fuel industries have been using this for a while too. It's more recent acceleration that they've been using it in different ways, in creative ways. And this is an example of how they've been using it. So basically, they have been trying to convince us through misinformation that they're part of the solution, that they're actually part of the green progress, the green transition. So this is an example where they use, for example, all the above language in social media campaigns and social media content to basically present oil and natural gas as part of the solution, as part of the climate transition. Now, this is misinformation because it's excluding really important information. And it's also, of course, can be categorized into the greater category of greenwashing. So why is it greenwashing? Why is it misinformation? Because, for example, while addressing methane leaks from fossil fuel infrastructure is an important step for us to talk about, Really, the conversation that we should be having is a fundamental shift away from fossil fuels because that's the most important piece of this puzzle. So even though this is a very simple social media post that came from a brief, a concept, a messaging workshop, all the pieces as creatives and marketers that we're used to, the fundamental narrative here that the fossil fuel companies are presenting and they want you to keep is you cannot live and exist in this world without us. Fossil fuels is here, and they're keeping that narrative alive through misinformation campaigns just like this one. So another example of misinformation. So for over the last 10 years or so, misinformation, greenwashing has becoming more and more complex, more multi-layered, and has been weaving itself into manipulative narratives. The fossil fuel industry has also been using misinformation to try and convince us that they really are part of making a better future. They're making a better future for all of us. And this example is from a ad that was not run that long ago, I think just a few years ago, which is a greenwashing campaign by Shell TV. And in this campaign, we see birds flying through the sky, we see fields and winds and solars, and the CEO of Shell Renewables, she's talking about how she's making the future cleaner and better and more better for her children, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth behind this ad and many fossil fuel misinformation ads that are out there is that between, for example, 2010 and 2018, 98.7% of Shell's investments were in oil and gas. So you have to ask, are they really making that shift? This is a shady narrative form of narrative and creative weaving that was ultimately used to convince citizens like you and me that Shell is continuing to root for us and that they want to be part of the solution. I've been thinking a lot about the fossil fuel. I've been talking a lot about the fossil fuel industry. Now, simply, in my opinion, they just provide very good and direct examples, and it's easy to show people, what disinformation is happening and what misinformation is happening because they just make it so bluntly obvious. But the reality is we have misinformation about climate happening everywhere. And it's not just coming from them, it's also coming from politicians and it's coming from organizations and NGOs and corporations. And this is the reality where we pretty much are within the European Union is misinformation, greenwashing. We are now seeing that 53% of green claims are vague, they're misleading, or they're unfounded. And that also that 40% of green claims have no supporting evidence. So this is the current state of where we are currently. This data is now 3 years old, just so that you know, but I still think it's very relevant because the thing is, it hasn't changed so much that we're still dealing with a lot of misinformation and greenwashing at the moment. And why should we care? Because greenwashing continues to delay climate progress by diluting our vision, by diluting our path, providing false information that doesn't give us all the pieces of the puzzle, distracts us, whatever form of complex greenwashing it takes. It's delaying progress for a better future. And that is if it has malicious intent, like Shell, or it doesn't have malicious intent. So basically, you're doing it without knowing that you're doing it. So, in a nutshell, both climate misinformation and disinformation undermines public trust in climate science. It delays progress, policy responses, and it polarizes public discourse. So marketing and creative, this is my call to the marketing creative industry today, is we really must start decoupling ourselves specifically from disinformation and misinformation. And we need to start thinking of how we can become part of the solution to creating a better future for everyone that suits both people and the planet and the profit, and not contributing to this over acceleration of pollution and where we currently are at the moment. So now moving from disinformation to misinformation, let's talk a little bit how marketing and advertising is contributing to pollution. So pollution, our industry has been a player in driving unnecessary consumption. On a finite planet, our planet only has so many resources, so much that it can provide. But marketing creatives are over here saying, hey, buy more, sell more, this is what you want. So we've been driving unnecessary, unsustainable consumption. And we've used our creative talents of storytelling, narrative building, creating pretty pictures and graphs and videos to persuade people that they really want to buy more stuff, either, even though they might not want it or they don't need it. And kind of a statistic to back this up is now we know that 80% of all products, for example, that are bought on Black Friday, they end up ending up in wasteful at the end of the year. So we are creating a lot of unnecessary waste. Marketers and communicators have also supported in changing behaviors that has also created this unnecessary waste. And we've been contributing to this form of pollution. And my favorite example of this, get excited about it because it's so interesting, is the story of Coca-Cola. Now, a lot of people in our space hate Coca-Cola for a good reason. They're not exactly the best and most ethical company. But what I think is interesting about Coca-Cola is at the very beginning of its time frame, it used to be a distributor. It used to be a small business because it was from the United States. And so basically what they were doing is they would sell their formula to small businesses. Those small businesses would create that Coca-Cola locally. Then they would distribute in glass bottles. And then it would go out to the local community. And then it would come back and they'd clean it and reprocess it. Very similar to what we have going with Mehrweg here in Germany. And another piece of that puzzle, it wasn't just that distribution process. It was also a social activity. So drinking Coca-Cola wasn't how it is today. You would go to the soda fountain or you would go to the soda shop with your friends and you would go and meet up with your friends at the soda shop. It would be a social activity. You'd hear music and you would drink your Coca-Cola. Completely different experience than how it is today. Now, when did all that change? Because if you ask me, well, that all sounds pretty good. It's also not really driving unsustainable behaviors, at scale like Coca-Cola is today. So where did it change? It all changed in the 70s when a CEO of Coca-Cola at that time basically decided that plastic was the future. Plastic was going to help them centralize their operation, was going to help them scale their profits, and was going to help them basically scale their global operation. Plastic was the solution. And now look where we are today with Coca-Cola being one of the major contributors to plastic pollution. Now, when they decided to introduce plastic in the 70s, people weren't completely excited about it. I mean, a lot of people were probably like, okay, what is this plastic? Is it good for my health? I like going to the soda shop. What do you mean this convenience thing, like going and picking it up at the local supermarket and taking it with me? So at this time, they onboarded a whole bunch of creative industry people to basically help teach the humans behavioral change on, hey, maybe we should start trusting plastic a little more. Hey, plastic is really convenient. Hey, plastic is good for your health. It's safety. It's not going to harm your children. And this is the narrative that started switching. And I think this is a really good story, even though it turned into a long one, because it tells you of how big of a shift marketers and communicators and creatives can create when they're given a narrative that is really influencing behavioral change. And again, I'm asking is like, even though that was probably one of the coolest and creative briefs of the 70s, was it really the right thing to do in terms of people on the planet? And do we want to keep being part of that process? That's the question here. So moving on, What is the last piece of pollution? How is marketers and communicators, creatives, or industry creating pollution? We also create something called mind pollution, or I like to call mind chaos or extreme overwhelm. For example, we're confronted with as much as 13,000 advertising messages a day. That's a lot of content. That's a lot of adverts and advertorial messages that are being put out there. And in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion in our industry, that's creating mind chaos and overwhelm. It's shaping narratives and we're shaping narratives and encouraging quicker buyer cycles. We're creating FOMO, trying to convince people that they're missing out by not having the latest trends and the latest stuff. And we're doing this through all subtle messages that are just overwhelming people. It's creating that crazy mind chaos. And we're encouraging people through our creative and our behavioral tactics and marketing to influence behavior, to push people to buy on impulse. And where does this leading us today? We're in like one of the biggest unhappiness pandemics of our time. People are unhappy. People feel disconnected. People, aren't as happy as they could be. I don't know how to explain that, but I think a lot of that has to be with how marketing communication is positioning how certain things are supposed to make us happy. And we have to ask us, are we positioning the right things? Are we just creating more mind chaos and overwhelm for people? Are we providing people with the things that they truly need? That's the question there. So I've been, I would say in English, harping. I've been harping on marketers and communicators a lot in this presentation. And I definitely don't want to say that we're bad people. I'm a marketer and a communicator. I'm a creative. I love my industry. That's why I'm here, because I really want to see it transformed into a force for good that contributes to all people, the planet, and profits. I want to see it used as a force for good. And I don't think most marketers and communicators are malicious. I don't think we actively want to do harm. But where we are currently as an industry is we need to start taking ownership of the harm that we are creating, whether that is within the disinformation circle, the misinformation circle, or the pollution circle. We need to start taking ownership and understanding where our story is within that play. So this is the question that we're wrapping here up at the end and we're going forward is, will we continue to use our creative talents to create good in the world, to create the world into a better place that's better for everyone? Or we put a full stop to contributing our creative talents to disinformation, misinformation, and pollution? That's the leading question for today. So where does our industry go here? What are the next steps? We talked about these three things. So in my opinion, and a lot of people that we're talking about currently in our industry, is in disinformation, we really need to move from this disinformation sphere to decoupling our creative talents, specifically as a marketer, as a creative, decoupling our talents from fossil fuel agents and corporate agents that are slowing down climate progress. What do we need to do with misinformation? We need to go from the misinformation and how we're fueling that misinformation as industry to creating valuable and honest campaigns without greenwashing that are truly creating long-term prosperity and well-being for all. And where can we go with pollution? We can move from creators of pollution, of mind chaos, etc., to serving the needs of all citizens and not contributing to endless growth on a finite planet. So me personally, Megan, I have a hope for our industry, and I truly believe that we can be a strong force for good in creating a better future for everyone. And I truly believe that marketers and communicators, creatives, people in my circle truly care and they do want to create change. And this is how I know. I recently did a survey this last year of marketers in Berlin. And I asked them, these are everyday marketers. These aren't marketers, for example, in our climate communication space. These are everyday marketers. And I asked them, hey, if you had the tools do you care about climate change? If you had the tools, would you make changes in your day-to-day job? And 75% of them said, yes, absolutely. 75% of them said, yes, I absolutely would make daily changes in my work if I knew how and what changes to make, because I care about climate change. I care about social things. I care about the things that are changing and working in our world. I care about these things. So 75% of those people would actually make change. And another thing that came from that survey is over 62% of them actually share that they're willing to take stronger action. Like they're ready to get on board. 62% of us are ready to make things happen. Really, what we're lacking is the tools and the knowledge to get there. So that's the next step. That's the next step for us today, as the people who are joining us in the replay and the live, is how can we start to take action and move from the disinformation, the misinformation, the pollution world that's currently happening to the world that we're building together. So as a marketer and communicator, things that you can start doing is you can start divesting your talents from disinformation. If you're an individual, you can sign up with Clean Creatives, and also Creatives for Climate has really great pledges where you are actively disinvesting your talents away from fossil fuel companies. Another big step is skilling up and feeling more comfortable with greenwashing so we stop doing it. Again, there's really great resources out there that are popping up, from Clean Creatives to University of Cambridge. They're all up there on the screen. Really great tools that are really helping us understand and get more comfortable with greenwashing and how not to do it. And a huge call to action for us as marketers and communicators is to get involved, because only as a movement together, all of us together, can we truly start transforming our industry into a force for good. But that comes from community action. So that's another call to action for you today, is join a community. I don't care if that's our community, Clean Creatives, or whatever community that suits you. Let's come together as an industry and let's try to do better. Let's make it into a force for good. And if you just happen to be on this call and you're not a communicator and you're not a creative, don't worry, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here. What are some of the things that you can do? Really, where our movement is lacking right now is awareness. Get the word out there, share what you learned today, tell your marketers and communicators within your department, hey, these are the things that are happening. Have you thought about this? Share this replay and this information with them. Start supporting them and connecting them and amplifying our work. Those are really the key pieces that we need today. So I hope that this presentation gave you a strong overview on the current status of our industry and the things that we're struggling with at the moment, and how we can start moving from these things of disinformation, misinformation, and pollution, the things that are really straining down our industry, and how we can reform that into a force for good and make marketing and advertising into truly something that offers value and happiness and success for everybody on this planet. Doesn't matter if you're nature or if you're society. So thank you for everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and you feel a little bit inspired. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat. I'll stick around for 5 minutes and answer any of your questions. And if not, you're always welcome to just send those to me over through social media. But thank you so much for joining the presentation today. And I hope you see you in our community, and the Can Marketing Be a Force for Good in the world? Thanks, Danya. I'm glad you liked it. I think this is such a good question. So the question from Jess is, do you think that a percentage of misinformation has increased since 2022? Now, there is actually a resource, a report that was done last year that basically hinted at this, and I'll share it in the replay of this. I'm not completely sure. I really thought about this and contemplated on it, and I don't know if, because in this report specifically, it actually does say that misinformation has decreased, that we're seeing less greenwashing incidents, but we're seeing larger monetary court case values of it. And, my gut feeling says the reason why this is happening is not because necessarily that people are getting smarter or et cetera, et cetera. I think people are green hushing. So people are actually withholding information, and we just don't have as many, examples happening. Like the volume of green campaigns that are running, good or bad, are just not out. That's kind of my gut feeling. But other than that, I don't really know. I haven't heard too many people give me a straight answer. And I think a lot of us more people who are really in sustainable marketing in this community are still trying to think that one out. It's like, is misinformation, greenwashing really decreasing? Or are we just green hushing and we're just not talking about our green campaigns anymore? Thanks, Jess, for the question. Yes, so please go and check the replay. So the question is, are you going to have links to all the communities that I shared in the resources? Absolutely. What I'm going to do right after this, or definitely by tomorrow, is I'm going to make an article in Substack. So in the Substack community, you'll be able to see the replay. And in that same replay article, you'll see all the links to all these different communities. So please go and get involved and sign up to them and start having the conversation. Cool. Thank you, everyone. If you have any more questions, the best place to drop them is to me on LinkedIn. If not, when you get the replay article that I'll be working on soon, pop the questions into there. I'm happy to answer them. So thanks, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here today. Thanks for joining in.